Welcome back, everybody, to the Fire Your MD Now radio show for the first installment. Friday. That's right. I'm going to be filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden every single Friday, 2 to 4 my time here in Alberta, Camrose, Alberta. Very snowy, very cold, about to get a lot warmer and very slushy. And the car washes are going to make a lot of money in the next little while. Same thing every year. We seem to have a little bit more snow than last year, but enough weather talk. We have a brand new call-in line here on the show. If you haven't been listening, it's 844-DR-Glidden, 844-DR-Glidden. Now for the numeric version of that, 844-374-5433. Once again, that's 844-374-5433. Now, knowing that I'm going to be doing this show every Friday, I end up going through a whole lot of material and busting my brain to think about things that I can talk about on this show. And the truth of the matter is, there's actually more going on than one could possibly cover in 2 hours. I mean, things are crazy. And at the same time things are crazy, hope brightens. I mean, things are getting worse. Things are getting better. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Now, I'm going to come to you today with a lot of different stories, some personal things that I've been dealing with here just locally that absolutely pertain to what we're doing with longevity. And before I do that, though, I would like to give just a couple of shout-outs. My best friend Joe called me about 20 minutes before this show started to pray for me, and that's how you know you got a good friend. I came from a family that was very religious. I was forced to go to church when I was a kid, which I absolutely hated, and I did everything I could to throw a wrench into the works. I would sit at the back of the church. I would wear a Guns N' Roses t-shirt and listen to my Walkman. You probably haven't heard that word in a long time, but I fought it every step of the way. But the fact is, my family cared about me a lot, and they were trying to instill some values in me. And while I bucked it every step of the way, I actually listened, and I learned a lot of things that carried me through life. Now, I know that we have a lot of Benny Hinn followers listening to the show these days since Dr. Joel Wallach appeared on his show. And I was listening to Dr. Peter Glidden yesterday on Metaphysical Thursday, talking about things outside of the physical that we cannot explain that happen all the time. And I'd like to give you just one of those with me. Now, as I said, I was a rotten kid, and I was smart, but I was rebellious and kind of stupid at the same time. But I remember clearly when I was a young guy, I was at church with my parents, and there was this lady who was known to be a prophet of sorts. She would have dreams and they would come true and things like that. And one day she came to me and she said that she had a dream about me. And she said that I was walking through a field of wheat. And as I walked along, people were springing up behind me and following me out of the wheat. And as I walked, there was an innumerable multitude of people following me out of the wheat. Now, at the time, I was a kid, and I had no appreciation for anything of any substance, and I was like, yeah, right. And, you know, as circumstances go, long story short, I'm on a radio show broadcasting to the whole world today, telling people to get out of the wheat. And I had a grandmother that prayed for me constantly because I was the worst kid. So my family put a lot of attention into trying to trying to help me out and find my way in life. And through courses of events, I found longevity. I have a great wife. I have great kids. I have the best family that anybody could ever ask for. And I know I said it last show, but I'd like to thank them once again. Here in Alberta, we got Dr. Joel Wallach, the man, the myth, the legend. Well, I shouldn't say myth. He's actually real. Dr. Joel Wallach, Thursday, March 27th, West Edmonton Mall, Gold Room at 7 o'clock. Now, if you've never heard of West Edmonton Mall, we got bragging rights to the biggest shopping center in the world here in Edmonton, Alberta. Go online and check it out. There's a lagoon running down the middle of the mall with a full-size replica of a Spanish galleon. There's a roller coaster. There's a wave park. There's just a million things to do at West Edmonton Mall. And if you're in the Edmonton area or anywhere in Alberta for that matter, come to West Edmonton Mall on Thursday, March 27th. Bring your family, spend a day shopping or going on rides or swimming or whatever at West Edmonton Mall, and then prepare to be blown away by the presentation of Dr. Joel Wallach. Friday, March 28th, Sherwood Park Community Center, 7 o'clock p.m., just outside of Edmonton, little suburb of Sherwood Park. And then Saturday, March 29th, Camrose Regional Exhibition Center, and that is a Saturday at 2 o'clock. We hope to see you there. Now, I've had a really interesting week. When you start really getting involved with longevity, you're talking to people about some pretty personal things. Health issues, deaths in the family, things like that. And I would like to talk for a moment about, and I'm not going to mention any names out of respect for the family's privacy, but there was a guy here in Camrose, and this guy was one of the best musicians. He could take a harmonica and make that thing wail. I mean, this guy was the best blues harmonica. He had a whole rig. He had a bunch of different harmonicas. He had microphone that he could put distortion through an orange crate amplifier and just make that puppy sing. And I actually had the privilege of getting on this stage with this guy quite a few times and playing music. Well, I had a guy, I kind of lost touch with him. I didn't talk to him for a long time, but I was recently contacted by a man here in Camrose that wanted to get his hands on some longevity products, and it turns out he was the brother of this guy. Now, I learned through his brother that he had died recently, and the more I listened to what happened, the more impressed upon me how important this job that we do is. Let me just get into it. This well-respected, well-loved member of our community, excellent musician, excellent husband. He had a hard time swallowing. He had something in his throat. He had a hard time swallowing. So what do? You go to your doctor, right? And they ran a scope into him. And when they did that, they tore a hole in this guy's esophagus. Tore a hole in it that previously was not there. Well, don't worry, we got that figured out. They sent him home and told him to drink Boost. Yeah, Boost. For a condition that he did not have before he went to his doctor. Well, guess what? That Boost went through the hole in his esophagus. It filled his chest cavity, got infected. He was rushed to surgery in Edmonton. They removed part of his lung. Then they put him on chemo. Endless series of x-rays. They radiated this man and he died. Really good man. Family torn up. They lost something that they could never replace. Now, it just seems to me if I was a professional driver and I accidentally ran over somebody, bare minimum, I would be facing manslaughter charges, which could very well put me in jail. But the MDs get a pass, don't they? Oh, you did your best. Sometimes the family will even thank them. Thank you. Oh, you did what you could. Thank you so much. It's awful. It's really awful what's happening all around us. Since I got involved with this, I can't tell you how many times I've ran into people that had the wrong kidney removed. The wrong kidney removed. I mean, if you're going to go in for one of these surgeries, you best get out a Sharpie and draw some instructions on yourself as to which organ is the right one to remove, if you can even say that that's such a thing, the right organ to remove. But that's their answer. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in your ability to heal yourself. They just believe in digging into you and radiating and burning and drugging. When is it going to stop? And how can you even trust them? I got a story out of RT News, and this headline says it all. Doctors warn new FDA-approved painkiller is deadly dangerous. Think about that. Even the MDs, this is going too far for them. A new painkiller set to hit the market in March is coming under heavy fire from doctors and lawmakers, warning of its powerful ability to kill. Although the opiate Zahydra was ultimately approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, that endorsement went against the recommendation given by the agency's own advisory panel. I'm going to get into this more after this break. Mike Phillip on Fire Your MD Now. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to Mike Phillip filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. And this is Mike Phillip Friday. I'm going to be filling for Dr. Glidden every single Friday from here on in, God willing. This just in, the Phillips are invading Tennessee. I'd like to give a big shout out to Steve and Louise and Sandra, I think I got it right. Mike and John, Elizabeth and Morgan, I love you. Enjoy Tennessee because it's a beautiful place. Now, we cover medical myths. We talk about ineffective medical treatments that quite often end up killing people. We try to bring that message to the masses that you can take your own health into your own hands. You can live a life free of pain and disease. I'm not allowed to say that we cure anything, but then again, I'm not allowed to say that water cures dehydration. Quite a situation, huh? How's that for your free speech? You're not allowed to say that vitamin C can cure scurvy when the British Empire found that out a long time ago. In fact, that's why they were known as limeys out at sea, because by the time a British naval vessel engaged the enemy had their teeth falling out, open lesions on their skin, and they couldn't think straight because they had no vitamin C. But I'm not allowed to say that. Guess what? We got Dr. Joel Wallach coming to Edmonton Thursday, March 27th at the West Edmonton Mall Gold Room, 7 o'clock. Friday, 28th, Sherwood Park Community Center at 7 o'clock. Saturday, the 29th at the Camrose Regional Exhibition. And I tell you what, Dr. Wallach is a wealth of information. I started following his protocols a few years ago, and you're talking to a guy who my lungs used to just burn with every breath I took. I had no energy. I was going downhill fast. So, I started doing some things about it. Now, this is going to be a little bit different show. This is going to be different than what you're used to. I got a guest on for the first hour. His name is Reverend Kevin Annette. And I can't think of a more courageous person to bring on the show. Now, the University of Victoria Center for Aboriginal Health Research conducted a 182-page study titled The Crisis of Chronic Disease Among Aboriginal Peoples, a Challenge for Public Health, Population Health, and Social Policy. That's a swear word, hey, social policy. I'm going to read you the first paragraph that they wrote in this huge study. Now is the time to tackle a growing challenge, that of improving the health and the well-being of Aboriginal peoples in Canada. It's no secret that Aboriginal people in Canada, no matter where they live, face unique health challenges. They experience higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, tuberculosis, HIV, AIDS, and many other diseases. Infant mortality rates are higher and life expectancy is lower than in the general population. Aboriginal suicide rate is 2 to 3 times higher than the non-Aboriginal rate for Canada, and within the youth age group, this rate is estimated to be 5 to 6 times higher. That's the first paragraph summing up this study. Okay, we got a massive problem in Canada, and it's being overlooked by a lot of people. Now, this radio show goes out to a lot of people. I want to dedicate this one to the First Nations peoples of Canada. Kevin, Annette, are you there? Can you hear me?
I am. Hi, Mike.
Reverend Annette, it's really good to have you on this show. You are a guy who I don't idolize guys because they can stuff a basket in a net. I don't idolize people for how good they can play guitar. What I do, I idolize courage. I look up to courage. I look for people that are strong in their heart and their will, and you've got an amazing story. And I would like you to start at the beginning, right off the bat here, and relate your story of what happened with you and the First Nation people of Canada, starting in Port Alberni, BC. Go ahead, Reverend Kevin Annette.
Yeah, sure. I was, born in Edmonton. I'm a Westerner. I grew up in the West, and I got ordained into the United Church of Canada in 1990. My second post was out in Port Alberni on Vancouver Island, and the week I got there, I had a small church. It was on the verge of dying, like a lot of...
Reverend Annette, I got to interrupt you. I hear the music, and that means we run out of time. We had a little bit of a scheduling error with GCN here, but we're on track. We'll pick this up on the other side. Mike Phillip filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Fire Your Empty Now Radio. Mike Phillip filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. And as I said before the break here, we're dedicating this show to the First Nations people of North America, South America, Central America. We strive on this show to recover people's health, and there's a crisis going on. And I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care where you come from. If you're belonging to my brotherhood of man, then I'm here to help if you need it. Now, we were talking to Kevin Annette. He had started out. This is a man with a story, people. You need to listen. Reverend Annette, could you please start over and give us your story?
Yeah, people, first of all, can follow it. You go to a website called hiddennolonger.com. There's a documentary film we did called Unrepentant, and that tells a lot of the story.
I watched the film myself, and it's pretty hard-hitting.
Yeah, and but let me just summarize. I got to Port Alberni in the fall of 1992. I started working as a United Church minister. Literally, the very first Aboriginal person I met told me about seeing the murder or the death of a child in the local United Church residential school. And I began inviting these folks into my church. I tripled the size of my congregation. I was bringing in a lot of Native folks. We opened a food bank. I was getting really involved in the community. And I began to hear more of these stories. Now, this was before any of the lawsuits had begun about the residential schools. And I went to the church officials about this. They immediately said, they're lying. None of this stuff happened. They're just making it up because they're angry that we took away their land. Don't listen to them. And I was pretty much warned, to not, give any credence to these stories. But I kept on. I had to find out why there were so many young Native kids killing themselves, why there was such an enormous suffering going on. And sure enough, and as I began to hear the stories, I realized this was a whole history that had been suppressed, a whole history of genocide, kept from us. And I gave voice to that. I allowed people to speak from my pulpit. I eventually got fired without cause when I found out, after a couple of years, that the church had been grabbing Native land through their missionaries and then selling it off for a lot of money to big companies. like in this case, McMillan Blodell, and Weyerhaeuser, big logging companies. The church were getting kickbacks for this, and none of the money was ever going back to the natives. And I wrote about that, and I got fired without cause, without any due process, eventually thrown right out of the church. And but that brought me a lot closer to people. I began to work full-time with the survivors of the residential schools for many years. We held tribunals as far back as 1998 to bring up the truth of these crimes when nobody was, talking about it. We eventually forced the government to issue that apology in 2008. We got compensation for people. We finally got this addressed at the highest levels in the international courts in Europe. They've already condemned Canada for genocide last year. So, by pushing this year after year, we got the truth out. But, the simple fact is that over 50,000 children never came back. Half these kids were murdered in these residential schools. They were starved to death, were exposed to TB and then never treated. They were sterilized. I mean, anything you can think of as genocide and mass murder, this happened right here in Canada. Right up in Edmonton. I mean, I've talked to people who at the old Blue Quill School near Edmonton, and the Camsell Hospital in Edmonton, there are kids being experimented on and killed. We've got all those testimonies up online at our website, itccs.org. That's for the International Tribunal on the Crimes of Church and State, itccs.org. You can see all the evidence there of this genocide in Canada. So, one thing's led to another, and now I'm working all over the world with people who've suffered the same kind of crimes.
It's just almost mind-blowing. When I was a kid, I had this real hunger for information. I would stay up till about 4 o'clock in the morning reading encyclopedias, and what really drew me was information about the Holocaust. And I would read about the systematic killing and incarceration and torture of a people. And I would get up in the morning and I would go to school and I would look at people in the street and I would think, I don't think I've ever met anybody that could push somebody into an oven. I don't think I've ever, I just couldn't. It was so far-fetched to me to believe that somebody could get to that point, when in fact, right here in Alberta, it was happening probably less than 100 kilometers or miles from my doorstep.
Yep.
So you've been working with the natives, and the government issued an apology. I don't see how an apology and some money really covers it. I actually, I have 2 kids from a previous marriage who have First Nations blood running through their veins. I raised them myself, and their grandmother was in a residential school in Saskatchewan, I believe. And when I told her I was going to have you on this show, she got a very terse voice, and she said to me, you tell me, you ask that man how a little bit of money and an apology can ever cover up for what we have lost. Now, I just read some statistics. Those are going back to 2009. The health of the natives in Canada is it's in the toilet. They have double the rates of diabetes. They have double the rates of cancer, HIV, and this is widely recognized. And it's just amazing. These people were dealt such a huge psychological blow. And how could you ever recover from that if your children were taken away from you? You never saw them again. And it's just amazing. What have you seen, Reverend Annette, in the health of the natives? Is this lining up with what you've seen?
Well, totally. I mean, the reality is, of course, apologies, it's all nonsense. I mean, if your kids were killed and thrown in a ditch, would you want a bit of money from the people who did it? You don't want those people in jail, but the people who did it, the government and the churches, we're talking United Church, Anglican Church, Roman Catholic Church, they've gotten away with mass murder by throwing a bit of money at people. And this is a crime in itself. For people to do that is a crime. And taxpayers are funding that crime every day by giving money to this government and these churches. So, we're talking mass murder and crimes against humanity. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with here. And it hasn't stopped. I mean, these crimes are carrying on as we speak. Children are being trafficked. There's more natives in white foster homes now, native kids, than ever were in residential schools. They keep losing their language. They keep losing contact with their families and their culture. That's genocide under international law. So, your friend is absolutely right. It doesn't do anything. And that whole apology was designed for white folks in Canada to make themselves feel better and to be protected legally from having to lose their shirt over this stuff. Frankly, the churches should lose their shirt. They shouldn't have been able to commit these crimes in the first place and get away with it by issuing a phony apology. So, we've got to clean up our own act in this country before we talk about other crimes.
Just it. I mean, we're supposed to go and invade Afghanistan and Iraq and all these other countries. And I'm speaking about the United States and Canada because, some goat farmer is going to ride a goat across the Atlantic Ocean with an AK strapped to his back and mount a terrorist attack. And, we're talking about preserving our way of life when, in fact, our way of life is built on blood that is crying out from the ground. How can you ever heal mentally if there's no justice?
Well, that's right. We've mapped 28 spots in Canada, mostly in the West, where there's mass graves of children in former residential schools. We actually started excavations in one to try to bring the remains of these kids home, and we went about a week, and then that got shut down by the government. The RCMP regularly go in and dig up these sites and destroy all the evidence. We know that. We've seen our witnesses do it. Our witnesses have seen it happen. So, this is a crime going on right now, and a lot of my early work in ministry was in doing street work in Vancouver, working with a lot of the homeless folks, most of whom are Native. And, all the time, the cops were picking up Native people, beating them to death. My best friend Bingo Dawson got killed that way by cops in Vancouver. And this stuff is regularly, nothing's ever done about it. So, yeah, you can say that's how the genocide's continuing, one of the ways.
There's also been allegations with the Saskatoon police force and a few others of driving them out of town about a half an hour and dumping them off in the middle of nowhere in freezing cold and things like that. So this definitely continues.
The child trafficking is a big thing, too. Children are regularly grabbed through the so-called child protection system. I can tell you, one of the community centers I work out of in downtown Vancouver, Native women regularly come in and say, Family Services just came in and grabbed all 4 of my children. And they never had to, if you're a Native woman, there never has to be a review done. They can just come and take your kids anytime they like. There's 2 standards going on, one for Natives, one for everybody else. And these kids are trafficked for a lot of money all through a foster care system. It's a big racket in human flesh, and Natives are vulnerable, right? So this is all called genocide under international law.
Reverend Annette, I would like for you to get a little bit into your role as the Secretary of the World Common Law Court in Brussels. How did you end up getting involved in that?
Well, about 4 years ago, I was speaking in Ireland, and there's groups of people all over the world who suffered the same kinds of things. A lot of them victims of Catholic priests. And that's because there's a law in the Catholic Church. People probably don't know this, but there's a law that says when children are raped, it's to be covered up and the police are not to be told. And if you're a priest and you tell about what happened, you can get excommunicated for it. So it's protecting child rapists, and that attracts a lot of those kind of people. So it's like epidemic, especially in the Catholic Church. A lot of those survivors started organizing, and they asked me to come over and help them. And we realized we're dealing with a big corporation called the Vatican, and we need to be organized internationally as well. So we formed this international tribunal into crimes of church and state. You can read about that whole history at itccs.org. And we formed out of that a common law court with jurors in Brussels. And people have the right to do this under common law. When the courts are not addressing an issue that's of real concern to the community, we can form our own courts. That's enshrined in Canadian law as well, the right to form citizen arrest, convene what Americans call citizen grand juries. And we started doing that. We the first case had to do with genocide in Canada. And we subpoenaed 30 people. We named the Queen of England, Elizabeth Windsor, the Pope Benedict, the guy who stepped down. And that wasn't any accident. He stepped down the month our verdict came down. He knew the heat was coming down on him.
You caused a sitting pope to stand down.
Yeah, we definitely had a role in that. Stephen Harper, we named 30 people. None of them ever responded to the charges of committing crimes against humanity or covering it up. And 58 citizen jurors found these guys guilty after 3 months of looking at evidence. We issued arrest warrants. And, one of the things is the Queen, presently, she was an eyewitness, saw her take 10 children out of a Catholic school in 1964 in Kamloops,
like her personal.
and none of those 10 kids were ever seen again.
Her personal.
And we named her. She never answered the charges. She was found guilty of that, the basis of that, and other evidence. So it's like these heads of state are criminals. And that's why we say today in Canada, all the oaths of allegiance to the crown are off. They're null and void because she's a convicted felon. And so, it kind of shakes up the whole situation for all Canadians when you look at all that stuff.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. This show, incidentally, goes out all over the world. We have listeners in Africa. We got listeners in Australia, all over the place. What really gets me, when they talk about the original people of Australia, they refer to them as aboriginals, as though they were abnormal or not supposed to be there. Reverend Annette, this is absolutely an amazing interview. We're going to bring you back on the other side after this break. Mike Phillip filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Fire Your MD Now Radio. This is a little bit different than our regular show. I know that, but the world needs to hear this. The world needs to hear what happened. A lot of the planet thinks that Canada is the land of sunshine and lollipops, and that everybody's nice. Don't piss us off in a hockey rink. We like our beer. But you know what? There's a lot that went on here, and there's a lot of innocent blood crying out from the ground. Before the break, I was talking to Kevin Annette, and I was mentioning that everywhere that these people moved into the world, they marginalized, segregated, abused, and out tried to destroy the indigenous people of the land. And what I was pointing out is, in Australia, the original people are referred to as aboriginals. Why is that? Why do we refer to the original people on this land as aboriginals? It doesn't make sense to me. And when you get further, this goes right to, we got the Queen on our money. And if what you're saying is true, she's a convicted pedophile. Reverend Annette, I'd like you to get into the role that the RCMP played in all of this, if you could.
Yeah, well, they were, of course, as people know, they were formed as a military organization to crush the Riel Rebellion. And then they were kept on to do convenient things like smash strikes and force Indians off the land and stuff like that. But basically, the RCMP were deputized in the 1930s. First of all, these so-called residential schools were set up by the Crown in the late 1880s. Every native child had to be in it, or their parents would go to jail. They went right up to 1996. And then, like I say, the death rate averaged about 50% every year. So the main people who brought the kids into the school were the Mounties. They were deputized in the 1930s under the Indian Act to do this. They would grab all the kids out of a village, bring them in. If they ran away, they'd chase them down. They covered up these deaths all the time. We've got a long history of the Mounties doing that. And the Mounties have also been involved in suppressing all the evidence. When the first court case started in British Columbia that I was involved with, I was consultant with the lawyers for the first case brought by Natives against the United Church and the federal government. It was called the Brenner decision in the BC Supreme Court. The Mounties admitted that they'd been falsifying documents, that when kids died, they issued fake death certificates. But the attitude was, well, we have the authority of the Crown behind us. What are you going to do about it? And that's still their attitude now. I called the Mounties in Port Alberni, and I said, there's a mass grave behind that residential school. It's even being talked about on the national news. When are you guys going to go in there and do the right thing and help disinter that and do a criminal investigation? He said, we don't have any information on that. This is their response, is complete denial and cover-up.
And these are all kids. It's just, it's on, I don't even know what to say. This is something that, it's just come to light to me in the last few years. I heard people mention the residential schools. Mm-hmm. And it was always mentioned. It was always really minimalized. Yeah, there was some abuse. Yeah, some bad things. There was a few bad apples. But, I mean, we're talking 53 mass graves across Canada. Wait, Reverend Annette, in all your years of doing this, I'm a white guy, okay? You're a white man.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the chances are that we're actually going to gain any traction? And I mean, you're on this show now. People are listening. Is this a growing movement? Is this something that people are upset about? Is this something that you think that our countrymen are going to do something about? Give me your prognosis for the future of Canada.
Well, no, I don't think most white Canadians care about this. I've traveled around. I devoted my life after I got thrown out of the church, and they helped break up my family, and I couldn't work anywhere because I'm under a permanent blacklist for doing this work. I had to spend my full time just working with people and trying to get people in my culture to look at this. And younger people are different. They're more open to doing something. But older generations forget it. They don't care. And you know,
Reverend Annette, I got to cut you off. I hear the music. Can we hold you over to the next hour?
Yep.
Mike Phillip filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. Very grateful to be talking to Reverend Kevin Annette. We'll be back after this.